hats today for the session. So for my first hat, I am here on behalf of the Planning Institute of British Columbia. We are one of the co-hosts of the conference. So we are the professional association of planners in BC and the Yukon. And sorry, don't mind the train going by. So we have about 1,500 professional planners in BC and the Yukon. We are the westernmost affiliate of the Canadian Institute of Planners. So we've been doing, the Canadian Institute of Planners has been advancing professional and responsible planning for over 100 years in Canada. So that's my first hat. And so on behalf of the Planning Institute of BC, I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for joining. Okay, so yeah, before we get into the conference, we wanted to just kind of get a sense of who's here. And I see there's people in the waiting room. Did someone let them? I think someone let them in. Oh yeah, okay, got it. So we're going to be doing a few polls throughout our session here, and I wanted to test out our polling technology. So I'm going to throw a poll up that we just kind of wanted to get a sense of who is here and who is in the room. So I am going to launch a poll. And now you should see a poll on your screen that allows, it's asking which of the following best describes, best kind of reflects who you are: municipal staff, provincial government, First Nations, elected official, consultant, nonprofit, concerned citizen, federal government. So there's no other options. So just forcing you to pick one of those options. I see some more people are joining in. So if you've just joined in, there should be a poll on your screen. So if you could just fill out the poll and just let us know who you are. Okay, so I can share the results. So you should, I think everyone should see those results shared. So we've got most people from not-for-profit. We've got a small group here. I think only 12, 15 people maybe. So most people are either not-for-profit or in the consulting sector, concerned citizens, and a couple of municipal government, First Nations government. So, all right, thanks again. So I think I can stop sharing that. And one more quick poll that is about where you're from. So I wanted to see where everyone's from. Are people from the BC Kootenays or the interior, Okanagan area, BC coast, or somewhere else in BC, outside Canada, or somewhere else in Canada? Great. So I'm sharing the results now. You can see that we have most people are from the Kootenays, and then we've got a smattering of people from the interior and the coast, and also from elsewhere in Canada. So welcome everyone. Stop sharing results. All right, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to put on my other hat now, which is I'm the Director of Climate Adaptation and Resilience with All One Sky Foundation, and I've been doing community climate adaptation and resilience planning for about 10 years or so. The session that we're going to present today is about climate resilient homes and buildings. And I also wanted to say that I think everyone's doing a great job of staying muted, which is great. And then there will be 4 of us presenting. So, whoops. So this is an overview of our session. So, and I wanted to say that we will have time for questions after, 1 or 2 questions after each session, and then we'll have a discussion at the end. So I encourage you to put your questions in the chat box. Hopefully everyone by now knows how to do that. And we'll address 1 or 2 questions after each presentation, and then we'll have a bit more of a time for discussion at the end. So I'm going to talk first about kind of the high level, and I guess you can see from our agenda here, we're trying to go from like the big picture down to the local specific. So I was going to give a high level overview of some of the standards and guidelines that are out there for making homes and buildings more resilient. And Lisa is going to talk about a BC project, mobilizing building adaptation and resilience, and then we'll move on to the Okanagan, where Zoe and Ava will talk about an Okanagan specific homeowners resource guide for resilience, and then we'll get down to the more specific from the city of Nelson, and Captain Scott Jeffrey there will talk specifically about Fire Smart in Nelson and what the city of Nelson is doing. Okay, so cool. So I guess I'll just launch in, and I think I have another poll for you, I believe, which is I just wanted to get a sense of how much everybody knows about climate resilient homes and buildings. I know for sure there's people in here that know a lot more than I do, so I'm going to launch this poll. So again, you should see a poll of just asking you kind of generally what your level of knowledge is about climate resilient homes and buildings. Like, do you know nothing, or do you know everything? Or maybe you're somewhere in between. Okay, there you go. So most people are on the little bit. About half people are sort of know a little bit, and then some people know a bit. Some people know a lot. So we don't have anyone that knows nothing, and we don't have anyone that knows everything. So that's good. We're kind of all in the middle, and I'm probably put myself in the middle as well. Okay, I can close that. All right, on to the session. So what I'd like to do is do a quick overview of, like I said, what we know about kind of standards and guidelines for climate adaptation and resilience. And when I look at the sort of the big picture of trying to incorporate climate change impacts and hazards into design, I mean, there's really these sort of the LEED process and this RELY system, which are fairly new, but I'm going to, and most of what I'm going to present today is going to be based off of what those two sort of systems are recommending for home and building construction to be climate adapted. So first of all is the LEED program, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. I'm assuming most people are familiar with that. It's the most widely used green building rating system in the world. And so they have a new pilot program, it's called, Designed for Enhanced Resilience, or Designed for Enhanced Resilience. And there's also an assessment portion to that where you can get certified to say that you've done a climate resilience assessment and planning. And so it's quite a new system. There's actually only 3 buildings as of last week anyway. There's only 3 buildings in the world that have achieved that designation with this new pilot credit. So that's those sort of LEED top ones there. And then on the right hand side there is the RELY system, which is sort of related to LEED, but it's also it's a climate resilient building and design certification system. At this point, and again, it's also very new. There's at this point, as of last week anyway, there's no buildings anywhere that have actually gone through that whole program and been certified. There was 12 buildings in the US that are kind of going through the process right now, and they're like airports and hospitals and stuff like that. There's an important distinction there that the LEED system is focused specifically on individual homes and buildings, and the RELY program also can certify neighborhoods, communities, so you can actually get your neighborhood or your community certified as a kind of resilient design and construction. And then I also just wanted to highlight the National Research Council. They have a program called Climate Resilient Buildings and Core Public Infrastructure Initiative, where they've invested about, I think, $40 million over the past 5 years, trying to figure out how to integrate climate change and resilience into building design codes and standards. And over that period, they've done updates to the electrical code and provided flood guidelines and wildfire guidance and standards for roofing materials and wastewater plants and roads and transit systems. So quite an innovative system. And so, yeah, like a lot of the work, a lot of what I'll be presenting is based off of these kind of big picture guidelines. And so then kind of stepping down a layer, there's also a whole bunch of different guidelines out there that are hazard specific. And I'm just gonna kind of scratch the surface on what some of these are. So in the top left there, there's the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. So we've been working with them over the past few years on several projects in Alberta, and they have a Designed for Safer Living series where they have a series of guidebooks on how to protect your home from hail and flood and fire and drought. And they also worked with the Durham region in Ontario to create a climate resilient standard for new houses. That's that bottom left one. And if you haven't noticed, I really like putting screenshots of report covers in my presentations. I think it looks good. So anyway, in the top middle there is the US FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and FEMA has dozens and dozens of guidebooks on how to protect critical facilities, schools, homes, hospitals, how to protect those from floods, fires, droughts, tornadoes, storms. So a whole bunch of resources available through them. In the bottom there is the Canadian Standards Association. I'm just showing that there's Z800 guide on basement flood protection and risk reduction. They also have guidelines for community flood resilience and durability of construction materials and other things. The top right is the United States Insurance Institute for Buildings and Home Safety. So that's probably, they've got it's called a fortified commercial standard for making your building essentially certified for wind and hail, and it's essentially what the LEED and the relay system refer to for all of anything that's related to wind or hail resilience. And then the bottom right is actually one of those products from the National Research Council here in Canada. They just are, this actually isn't public yet, but they are coming out with a national guide for wildland urban interface, and sort of one of the spin-offs of that project I mentioned, and that should be out in the near future. So yeah, the things I'm talking about, this is first just giving you a high level of what all the guidance and guidelines that are out there for climate resilience in homes and buildings. I see there's some messages in the chat box. I don't know if, and I think if there's anything that I need to address right now, maybe someone could let me know, but otherwise I'll keep plowing through. So I'm going to shift a bit and talk a bit more about what these guidebooks say, but first I'll just say I'm going to focus on these 5 impacts. I know there's a bunch of other climate related impacts out there. These are just the ones that, to be honest, these are the ones that we focused on in the projects I've done recently. So they're the ones I've been doing a lot of research on lately. So and in terms of how these affect homes and buildings, so extreme heat, of course, makes your building uncomfortable or maybe unbearably uncomfortable and leads to a variety of health impacts. Wildfires, they burn your building down or your community. And rain and flooding, of course, if you live in a floodplain, then you can have your home can be washed away by flooding, but the most common issue with heavy rain and flooding is in your basement. So too much water coming up and going into your basement or the lower parts of your house. So when I'm talking about damaging storms, really, this is hailstorms, windstorms, lightning, ice storms, and those primarily affect your roof, your siding, your windows, your doors. And drought is the last one, which of course is primarily affecting your landscaping in your yard, your trees and your shrubs and drying things out. So I'm going to talk about what some of those guidelines say with respect to dealing with some of these impacts on your home. And a lot of these are talked about with the other presenters. So I'm really just kind of scratching the surface here. So the first one, I guess, around storm resilience. So this is, as I said, this is wind and hail. So what can you do to protect your home or building from storms? And again, this is all sort of referring back to what do the LEED system and the relay system and all these other standards and guidelines say? Well, they say you should have the steeper the slope of your roof and the more simple your design is, the more resilient your roof is. So like flatter roofs and more complex roof designs are more resilient, or sorry, more vulnerable to these types of storms. You can get a variety of different impact resistant roofing, siding, windows, doors. You can install roof underlayment like this. It's called the ice and water shield that goes underneath your, whatever your roof cover is, usually shingles. You can install protective shutters or storm shutters along your windows and doors. You can have what's called passive survivability and backup power. So both the LEED system and the relay system have certification requirements for passive survivability, which essentially is the ability of your building to maintain critical functions and critical conditions for occupants. So that's like maintaining power and heat and water in the event that those are lost. Also providing undercover or covered parking spaces and hail guards on roof mounted equipment. So that one's obviously more like commercially relevant for commercial or large residential applications. So that's storm. The next one is around extreme heat, and I think Lisa's going to maybe touch on this a little more, but in terms of those sort of international guidelines from LEED and RELI, they all really point to one place. They point to this organization called 2030 Palette. So they're an organization that provides a database of solutions for low carbon resilient buildings, and they have dozens of options on how you can protect buildings from extreme heat. So everything from passive cooling and heating systems, like the orientation of the building, and window shading and overhangs and natural ventilation, and having triple pane windows with glazing and having more insulation in your ceiling and walls, cool roofs, designing for increased cooling loads, so increased air conditioning or somehow space cooling loads in buildings, or flexibility in your mechanical rooms for cooling systems in the future. So yeah, as I said, both the LEED and the RELI system essentially say, go to this 2030 Palette organization and do some of the stuff that they say you should do. Wildfire resilience, I'm just going to let Captain Scott talk about this one. But yeah, obviously there's the basics of wildfire resilience is making sure you're using fire resistant materials and fire smarting your property and having your air purification systems if you're subjected to major smoke and things like that. But again, Scott's going to go through that in detail, so I am not going to touch on it any more than that. On flooding, so what the requirements are if you want to meet the standards for the LEED and RELI is that you really can't build a property in a 500-year floodplain or in any other flood-prone area. And if you do, then there's a whole bunch of different requirements you need to meet, like locating your critical equipment, as in electrical, heating, cooling, ventilation equipment above the flood level, providing some sort of flood protection measures. And that photo there is actually an example of a flood gate that kind of closes to block off water from going in that entrance door there. So there's ways to protect buildings with using those types of flood protection measures, and not having a basement or any sort of living space below the flood construction level. Also, there's using natural infrastructure and low impact development measures to help retain and infiltrate runoff and water, using flood damage resistant building materials. So there'd be things like brick and metal and concrete, and providing permanent backup power for temporary generators. So that's for your critical utilities like your HVAC systems and boilers. So that's kind of more like commercial, large residential application. That's what the guidelines say. And then more kind of specific to around your home. Of course, the same things apply, right? I mean, we just really shouldn't be building in flood risk areas in floodplains. If you have to do that, then obviously like drainage is probably the number one thing you can do in your home, whether you're building a new home or doing significant landscaping, making sure that that water from your house drains away from your house and not towards your house is essentially that's the number one recommendation. And having good compaction in your backfill zone. So when your house is built, they have to dig a bigger hole and they backfill that hole. So it's a common failure point in flood events. If you have to build in a flood zone, then you get water in your basement, then you should probably have a sump pump, and you should also probably have a sewer backwater valve, which stops the sewer flow from backing up in your house. Same with gutters and downspouts. So actually, when I bought my house didn't have any gutters on it or downspouts. So when it rained, all the water just pooled beside my house and went into my foundation. So I installed some gutters and put them into rain barrels. And then also using permeable materials for driveways and walkways. So like paving blocks and cobblestones that allow water to kind of move through and percolate down into the soil. And the last one is around drought resilience. So in the big guidelines, this just comes down to use less water. And LEED has both guidelines for outdoor water use and indoor water use. And basically for the outdoor water use, they essentially say you should have landscape. You should have landscaping that does not require permanent irrigation. So that means sort of like drought tolerant trees and shrubs, and collecting and using rainwater on site, and using alternative water sources if you can. And then on the interior, it's about using low flow fixtures and fittings is what they're recommending. So I think I'm pretty close to the end here. I just wanted to put a quick plug in for our, this is actually, it's a tool that we built called climateresilienthome.ca, and I have it in the virtual, the exhibit hall, I believe it's called. So yeah, I encourage you to have a look at that, climateresilienthome.ca, and that is all for me. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and I will stop sharing. I guess we do have the opportunity to answer a couple questions. I haven't looked at the chat box yet. I don't actually know where we are on timing, but are there any quick questions? Yeah, it sounds like people are saying the experience with the relay system so far, it's cumbersome and not recommended. This is from Andre, I believe. Yeah, I don't have any experience using it, so that's great. Right. Yeah, I'm just scrolling through. I'm actually just going to pass it off. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it off to Lisa, and I'm going to try to not scroll through all these chat box comments and try to figure it out. I'm just going to pass off to Lisa, and we'll try to address some of these questions and comments toward the end. So over to you, Lisa.
Jeff, yeah, and David, I just saw your question, and I'm about to answer that question in just about 1 second here, so it was very timely. So hi, everybody. Nice to be here. Nice to have you all with us. And I'm excited to see that a lot of you are quite or very familiar with sort of resilient buildings and homes, because it's always a nice opportunity to hear and learn more from you all. So don't be afraid to add your thoughts and comments and questions as I go along here. Before I do, you can see we're actually going a little poll crazy on this one. So I want to just do a quick one here for you. Let me see if I can do it. Where is that? Here we go. What is the most important action you can take to improve building resilience? Hopefully you are seeing that now. So a little bit, maybe a little bit of a trickier question. So understanding your building's energy needs under a future climate, making sure members of your design team are aware of climate impacts, identifying potential hazards facing the site, involving future occupants in identifying how future climate could impact. Oh, you're not seeing it. I don't think I can launch it. Jeff, do you mind launching?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I wasn't seeing it either. I'm trying to
let me see here.
Here we go.
How about that? Oh, there we go. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, got it.
There we go. So understanding your building energy needs. And so actually, while you're looking at these questions, I'll note that I'm going to be talking a little bit about sort of the building scale. Jeff introduced some strategies for both buildings and smaller homes, and I'm going to be talking more about larger homes, so multi-unit residential buildings and a couple of others as well. So I see a few of you have answered. Smart cookies. I can see by the answers already, this was not as tricky a question as I thought it was. Let me see. I'll just end and share now. You all got it. I wasn't, I didn't know that you guys were going to be so savvy about this, but yes, all of the above obviously are, maybe not obviously, but obvious to you, are really important things to take into consideration when we're looking at improving building resilience. So, all right, I've got some good knowledge to contend with here. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about resilience at the building scale, or building resilience into building design in British Columbia. So in terms of what's already going at the landscape level here at the province, there's a lot of activity happening right now. We're really lucky that in BC we've got so much momentum. Nothing quite translating yet into specific requirements, but it's all underway. So right now a lot of So current requirements right now are mostly for public sector buildings. So all public sectors or all ministries of the province of BC under the Climate Change Accountability Act are required to report back on how they're going to be addressing climate risks in their portfolios. Right now, that's a little bit fuzzy in terms of what that looks like, but they're working on kind of developing a full framework for what, what they're actually going to be required to report. Some of the work that's going to inform that is one that actually is just starting around now, which is that public sector building requirements are going to be issued. So that's sort of actual design standards and requirements for how they'll identify and address climate hazards in public sector buildings and projects. So that's anything from correctional facilities to ferry terminals to BC housing, sort of affordable housing, hospitals, higher education, K-12, everything. So lots of buildings that are covered under that work. There's also lots of conversation happening right now about how to integrate future climate and thermal comfort, especially into the code alongside some energy requirements that we already have as a result of the BC Energy Step Code. And we're working with BC Housing right now to develop a set of resilient housing guidelines. So not necessarily requirements, but some materials for the building industry that will help to understand how to assess opportunities for improving climate resilience. So that's a bit of a landscape. What I'm going to be talking about here a little bit more in detail, though, is this particular project called MBAR. This is a BC Housing-led initiative called Mobilizing Building Adaptation and Resilience, or MBAR. And this is a multi-year, multi-stakeholder knowledge and capacity building project. It's been going for about 2 years now so far, maybe a little more than 2 years. It's got about 30 organizations, agencies, and industry partners, but as I mentioned, it's kind of being spearheaded mostly by BC Housing. And the aim of this project, this program, is really, well, kind of threefold. Firstly, to help building owners and their occupants, so the residents themselves, protect their investments and adapt to climate change stresses and shocks. So stresses things like, creeping precipitation changes or temperature change increases, as well as shocks, things like floods, wildfire events, heat waves, and so on. They look also beyond the building scale, so we're focused on buildings, but we want to understand how buildings can actually act as resilience hubs that help improve and stabilize communities throughout, in a broader sense, including during natural disasters. And the third one is really where we're focused a lot of our, what we're focused on doing a lot is building overall industry capacity in understanding, what is climate resilience? Why do we need to care about it? How do we adapt? How do we improve our building designs and ultimately increase the number of resilient buildings that we're seeing in British Columbia? The program, so far as we've defined, or as we're kind of moving through it, we've defined resilient buildings as those that are both designed and managed to maintain their critical operations and functions in the face of a shock or a stress. So they have to kind of keep doing what they're meant to be doing, whether that's housing people or providing healthcare services or providing educational services. Return to those normal operations in a fast and efficient manner. But beyond just being able to cope and maintain, we also want to enhance healthy, livable spaces for the occupants or the residents that live within them, while also taking advantage of opportunities. So I've put in brackets here, low carbon resilient buildings, because that's where we're really starting to see it going. We've talked a lot about mitigating climate change and reducing emissions and improving energy efficiency. Now we're talking a lot more about improving resilience and adaptability. Well, we actually have to talk about them together. So that's a key, interest or opportunity, as well as things like reducing operating costs, improving social connections, and others. The way that we, some of the resources that we've been releasing so far that I've had the honor of working on are displayed here. So to the left, the builder insight, we worked with this with Focal Engineering. It's basically a builder insight designed for energy modelers to help them understand how do you look at considerations of future climate in building design, specifically passively cooled buildings. So how do we assess that appropriately, and what are some of the pitfalls to avoid? So kind of a bit more of a technical document. The one in the middle is intended for both design teams and for local governments, or pretty much anyone who's interested in it, which is a design guide supplement on overheating and air quality. So this is an illustrated guide that shows sort of identifies the strategies that you can implement in residential buildings that both achieve really good energy efficiency performance, good emissions performance, and also reduce those two key climate hazards, the risks of those two hazards. And then the one at the sort of the top right, the heat waves there, we've actually released a couple of different, I think there's about 7 or 8 or so, kind of conversation starters, basically sheets that outline some of the key strategies that you can consider to reduce the impacts of hazards like heat waves or flooding events or power outages, things, and they contain things that Jeff has illustrated. We, BC Housing also contributed to the development of this particular resource, the Climate Resilience Guidelines for BC Health Facility Planning and Design. This is actually, I guess I would say, a fairly recent requirement now for health facilities specifically. These were released at the end of 2020, and they outline the process and requirements for all actors involved in new healthcare facility planning and design. So the health authorities themselves, the design teams, the planners involved. And it illustrates kind of, how to improve facility resilience all the way through that process. So what steps do you have to take? What strategies should you consider? And what are the requirements that need to be met? So it includes a whole bunch of information that is now starting to make its way into actual kind of requests for proposals like new facility design. So those are some of the resources that BC Housing has kind of released so far that's helping to improve building resilience. What I'm going to focus on though for the last little bit of the presentation is, an area of focus that we've really been supporting BC Housing on, which is the pilot program that we have helped them run. And the pilots are basically opportunities for developers or landowners or sort of project owners to take their project through a process of understanding what are the key hazards that are facing my site and what are some of the strategies that I can use to kind of mitigate those hazards or those risks. So we've been working with some leading developers in British Columbia, most of these projects in the Vancouver area. That's good to see, Andre, that you're using that guidance. That's great. And basically what we do is we kind of bring pools of different experts together. We call them MBAR design advisors to help us sort of understand and identify what those strategies are that these building projects can consider as they go through stages of design. So this is the process overall that we kind of take them through. It's pretty high level, but it's actually been found to be quite useful. I will say that a lot of the projects that have entered into the program come in kind of slightly later stages of design. So we're not able to do, we're not able to influence the design quite to the extent that we would like to, but it's still been a really useful process, I think, for all parties involved. So the process that we've taken them through so far is first we basically just get, a good understanding of what the project looks like, what does the site look like, what stage of design are they in. We look at future climate projections for the site. We confirm what modeling will or has been done and whatever the assumed variables are. And often we'll recommend that they undertake sort of a future climate analysis on any kind of modeling, energy and emissions modeling that they've already conducted. Then this is sort of the bulk of what we offer is that we kind of conduct a preliminary hazard screening based on their location and their setting, drawing from the different kind of sources of information that are available at the provincial, regional, or local scales. And in doing so, we kind of help to educate, like, these are some of the things that we could, that we need to start thinking about and how they might be integrated into your design. And that's where we draw on those MBAR design advisors to help identify those different strategies to enhance resilience to the hazards that are of greatest concern to that particular building project. So in terms of the sources of information that we draw on, seems like people on the call are probably well aware of these already, but we do have lots of great information available from different levels of government, as well as from leading organizations like PCIC and the Fraser Basin Council. So there's kind of Canadian data portals like Climate Data Canada or the Climate Atlas. There's PCIC's Plan to Adapt tool. There's the province of BC's preliminary strategic climate risk assessment and some of the resources that they have by hazard. But then, as I mentioned, there's some of those more regional resources by hazard, like Fraser Basin Council's regional flood maps. Municipal plans may have different levels of may have kind of conducted different assessments already that can provide information. And then there's certain intermunicipal agencies like the North Shore Emergency Management that may have also developed some information that can be useful as well. It's always good. Yeah, and please do add in any others that you know of. These are just sort of a sampling so far. So I can see there's another example in the chat, which is great. Do add more in there if you know of others. So when we basically do a survey, as I said, we kind of take a look at the building, look at the site, do that kind of high level exposure screen, and then we can start to ask certain questions to identify what are those hazards that are going to be likely facing that site. So for example, if we wanted to assess a project's exposure to flooding from either sea level rise or riverine flooding, we would ask some questions like, is it located in a coastal area? Is it at risk of storm surge? Is it located on or near floodplains or wetlands? I don't have very much time left here at all. And basically look at a couple of different strategies that we could recommend to them that would sort of help them identify, well, what is it that we could actually do to try to minimize those risks. Okay, so I don't have very much time. So now I'm just going to go quickly through some of the pilots and what are the kinds of strategies that we outlined for them. So this is the first project, one of the earlier ones that we looked at. This is actually a BC housing project. It was a residential building, or is a residential building with a transition bed and withdrawal management center. So they modeled it to 2050 climate to sort of take a look at what sort of future temperatures they could expect. Because they didn't have a significant budget, they did prioritize passive cooling strategies, so focusing on good glazing with good solar control, operable windows for passive ventilation. And then again, because budget was limited, instead of adding full mechanical cooling, they put a cooling coil in the ventilation unit. So that kind of just tempers the air a little bit, while also providing a higher level of filtration, or MERV 13, which I can explain in the chat later if you have questions about that. Quadrille was another great pilot. This was a mixed-use development, residential, office, and light industrial. They were going for high energy efficiency performance, step code 3. They decided not to provide full cooling to their residential suites, but they did design their amenity space with backup power, cooling, and enhanced filtration for sort of enhanced resilience and comfort during more extreme events. They also built their parkade entrance above the flood construction level to protect their service rooms, which were still below grade, and added meters to measure movement to inform any kind of post-earthquake condition assessments, which can actually help to save money down the road. And then this is my third case study, and then I just have a little summary slide after this, Jeff. Urban Arts did a great First Nations residence and healing center in the downtown east side. This is still in design. They also added an amenity space that they designated as a refuge area, but in this case, they actually added an emergency cooling and warming center for the broader community as well, so acting as that hub for the greater region. They did arrive a little bit later in design, so they were a bit constrained as well, but they did also add enhanced filtration to the refuge area, MERV 13 for general operations, but then even improved performance for those sort of air quality advisories. Finally, they also did a rough-in for easy addition of solar PV for backup power later. They did want to consider low carbon backup power for improved resilience during outages, but it wasn't something that fit in the budget at this time. So what are the essentials here? I mean, there's lots of them and it depends on the site, but these are the ones that we now expect as a baseline from pilots moving forward. Basically, obviously, you have to do a hazard screening. You have to model to at least 2050 using future climate. Providing full or partial mechanical cooling is going to be increasingly important for these buildings, as is providing enhanced filtration to all the units, or at least a common refuge area. We have to include measures to minimize risk of flooding at or below the grade, and then low carbon resilient sources of backup power have to be at the very least explored. So in sum, lots of lessons learned that we can chat about. Sorry, Jeff, and I'm going a little bit over time. Overall, we learned that earlier is better. If we can get you into design or thinking about resilience early in design, it's much easier to incorporate strategies at that stage. That being said, later is better than nothing at all, and additions and major renovations are all opportunities to improve resilience as well. So there's never a bad time to think about this in large building projects. So thank you for that. Sorry if I went a little over there, Jeff, and I'm happy to have any questions or comments.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I think we will, if you have questions for Lisa or myself or any of the other panelists, I would just encourage you to put those in the chat box, and we'll get to those at the end in the panel discussion. So I think you can stop sharing your screen, Lisa, and we will turn it over to Ava and Zoe from the Okanagan region. There you go. We got your screen. Looks great. I think you guys are on deck.
Well,
All right.
hello. Well, we are coming bottom up. You guys were top down. Thanks for inviting Zoe and I to talk about our resource guide, Building Climate Resilience in the Okanagan. Before we go further, we just wanted to let you know that we're coming to you from the unceded ancestral territory of Syilx Okanagan people here. So let me just see how this works. Normally it goes like this, but not.
There we are.
There we go.
So Ava and I actually looked, we've worked a lot together. And when she says bottom up, we really mean bottom up. From you folks doing all that whole built environment and the concrete and the wood, we're doing it from taking all of what you're trying to do and put it into the heads of the public. So we took a look at this project from an oblique angle. So we needed to fill a gap and educate and inform, because there's lots of overall pieces to this climate literacy puzzle with restrictions or regulations or built environment objectives. But we needed to bring this down to the level that the public could consume it, like a coffee style, coffee table type book, and in an accessible format.
So in the book, we are exploring topics like shifting climate, water issues, too much water, too little water, wildfire, energy efficient buildings, invasive species, biodiversity, and food security. And did you have to add something to that?
No.
So, but really, we wanted to provide practical hands-on information and advice about taking actions, or actions that each one of us can take to make the places we live in more robust in the face of climate change.
When Ava and I have been out on the road doing these workshops, we were, always taking huge amounts and stacks of books with us to actually be able to provide this information. So this guidebook sort of subtly and continuously reinforces and empowers people and property owners to take control of their environment, so that they can look at, or at least understand, where they live.
And then throughout the book, interwoven is Syilx Okanagan Nation's perspective. And another thing is, as we were doing our workshops for the last 5 years or so in the Valley, we, like Zoe just said, had bags of materials to distribute. And generally, climate change issues are discussed in as a single issue topic, as well as Lisa and Jeff just illustrated, that most climate adaptation publications are intended for government or scientific use and are technically and policy driven. We wanted to do something that is more in layman's language. So this book is really when you have all these different real-time issues, fires, floods, it's very complicated. They're all interconnected and they overlap. So the challenge of writing this book was how to synthesize all these complex issues into key messages that would help the homeowner connect the dots and provide greater insight and understanding, just like I said, in a simple language. So it's more like the executive summary of all issues. And then we have lots of illustrations and photographs. And then wherever there's this computer showing on the digital version of the book, you can actually click on links and go into much deeper reading. And the book was meant for realtors, mortgage brokers, new homeowners that already live here, and then or new homeowners that are just arriving into the Okanagan, and long-term homeowners that are just starting.
Yeah, and as the effects of climate change have started to hit us all, as local governments, where I'm from, we needed to supply some important information in this palatable format. The emergency operations centers of 2015, 2017, and 2018 really highlighted the lack of understanding, the lack of preparation, and the understanding of the roles and responsibilities of property owners when it came to extreme weather events or where climate change was taking. And now you get to answer the poll yourself, the one that I always ask when I'm talking to people in an emergency operations center. So Jeff, if you could launch that poll, that would be just great.
Here we go. Are you very prepared? Somewhat prepared?
To be launched.
Great. So when I say, are you prepared? Have you looked at your property from the extreme weather perspective? Have you put your 72-hour kit together? Have you assessed what your drainage is? Have you looked at how your property is, which with Scott we'll talk about later, from the fire perspective? These are all components of how prepared are you for climate change. So it looks like we have somewhat prepared is 50%. So that's pretty good. And very prepared is 19%. So my goodness, you folks, we're talking to the converted here.
Yeah.
So we'll continue on.
Thank you. So another, oopsie, let me just see. This is sometimes it goes and okay. Yeah, so this book was a truly collaborative work with over 27 contributors and reviewers. And each topic contained in the guide is complex, so that we kind of had to work really hard to craft key messages so central themes could be addressed in a manageable and engaging way. So, and we've distributed it as hard copies and digital. And actually, this is my plug to say, if you guys, any of you would like a hard copy of this book, you can put it in a chat box, your address, and we would be happy to send it to you. Did you have anything else to say? So here's just some pages from the book, Understanding Water. We live in the lowest precipitation area in Canada, but we use the highest amount of water, 675 liters per person per day.
And some of that comes about because people are moving from other areas to the Okanagan, and they see that great big lake and they think we have no water issues at all, but it's just the myth of abundance. So we were very surprised at just how much each and every person consumed and how little they knew about where their water came from.
And we're snowpack dependent. And then with Silk Okanagan Nation shared the water declaration with us. And I just wanted to read a few of their quotes. Yeah, water is our relation. And what Zoe and I really like is that water comes from the sky and the highest place, yet it never willfully rises above anything. And then there's one more. It will always take the lowest path in its humility, yet of all the elements, it is the most powerful.
So having this silk perspective woven throughout the book really provides newcomers and existing residents a feeling of place and understanding that these folks have been here for 14,000 years. And so they have definitely have a lot of information and knowledge to share.
Yes. So then too much water, like you guys already talk about it. We tell people how you should treat your house and your garden as a mini watershed. Your roof acts as a mountaintop, and as the water is coming off the roof, you then find methods and ways of capturing it. And of course, you guys already know all these things, so I will not go into it. Okanagan Basin Water Board has a book called Slow It, Spread It, Sink It. So that principle is good. And then, of course, understanding your flood risk or where you're purchasing your house. Zoe?
Yeah, so again, from the government perspective, I always feel like the bad cop in these things is, you know, we need to collectively face the hard facts of our poor planning decisions over the length of time that we have moved into the landscape. So then really it's the new reality that's going to drive us all in the future. And how many times can we bail people out? And I'm just using this particular picture as an example from the book. This area floods significantly 3 of every 5 years since 1976. So these folks expect that we're going to remove them, feed them, house them, and fix the damage caused. And at this point with climate change, how much more and how much longer can we do this?
And then flat roofing your homes, we have several pointers of what can be done, but then we have the additional resources that people can go further and find more information. Flood insurance and prevention, we feel that even future is going to be determined by the insurance bureaus, how the future of our
the built environment responds. And that's one of the reasons the guidebook was put together with the mortgage lenders and the insurance companies as a component, is because we're anxiously waiting to see how these two entities respond to the costs of climate change. And if we can work on this as a united front, then the compendium is built in part to support one another. We need to start looking at, and Scott will talk about later, is fireproofing our properties. We need to have mortgage lenders and insurance companies start asking those important questions of people. Do you have a drainage plan? If you're getting a loan for a $5 million winery, you need to have a drainage plan before you get your money. That type of thing we need to see start moving in to those entities, so it takes it back off us as architects, as local governments, and as other agencies to be the bad guy.
Okay. And then, of course, natural shorelines, we've destroyed 65%, well, destroyed, altered. 65% of Okanagan Lake has been altered. And we've actually eliminated 85% of wetlands. So how do homeowners that want to have a house right on the edge and have the lake views, how can we persuade them that they should go further back and to buffer the flood zones? And then with lack of water, we have these dinosaur landscapes still in the Okanagan that are water suckers, and people have with this nostalgia of English gardens, and how do we re-educate it? Like I always say, who has the power? Who has the power that can influence these people? So now we have water efficient landscaping, and people, lots of landscapers put a landscaping fabric and rocks and 2 or 3 plants, and that's called zero-scaping. Actually, they even call it zero-scaping, whereas really we should be using drought-tolerant plants with efficient irrigation and mulching.
And again, this is where we as local governments need to step back and start thinking about, are there going to be areas that we can put in policy where we can ask developers, single-family units or multi-unit developers, to provide us the actual appropriate landscape plan and actually have those signed off before the building takes shape. And like Lisa said, you know, and Jeff as well, LEED has led the way in a lot of this, but it's taking it and getting it sort of filtered down, right down to the residential lot that's going to be a challenge.
And then fire, and Scott is going to talk more about that. I just hear people think if you have a large house, these huge cottages as they call here, the fire, yes, goes up the hill. This house potentially is in a dangerous situation, but people that live in Penticton think, oh no, we are fine. But Penticton is completely in a wildland urban fire interface, and just raising that awareness that people are aware of it. And then in our book, we have these illustrations that are a bit extreme of the fire hazards, and we all have some of these around our house. I still have my wood stacked up against my wall, and I want to use it all up before the winter's over. And then we have an extreme of fire smart home. So some kind of a compromise between the two of them, it would be a thing. Then people are now nearly really taking trees out because of this fire smart attitude, and they don't pay any attention. In the Okanagan, we have very important species that depend on wildfire live trees. So before people just take trees down, they have to at least notice if there's bird nesting there and wait till the birding season is over, the nesting season.
Well, and this example that Ava's put up illustrates it beautifully about the fact that we need to work together. we need to consider all the fire smart principles, but we need to think about that through the lens of not endangering the environment or compromising it in the future. There are small areas that have been basically clear cut in these sensitive environments. And then when we get a rain on snow event, or we have some sort of runoff situation, it's down the hill. So we've done one thing to help a house out or to help a neighborhood out, but in another way, we've created an issue. So it's balancing those off. And this is relatively new to lots of local governments when we start going down that road. So it's going to take us all working together to move that bar forward.
Yes, and then we've also included the silk prescribed burns page to the book.
With the silk perspective on burning, especially when this book is handed to somebody that's new to our community. Oftentimes we're getting people moving in from Vancouver or Toronto or Calgary. It's really important for them to understand that we are in a fire-based ecosystem. And in the past, we've really ignored the Indigenous knowledge and perspective on the prescribed burning. And, they've been practicing this for millennia. And thankfully, BC Wildfire has really made strident efforts to engage and start changing that oversight.
And of course, as this is our houses presentation here, we do have a few pages on energy efficient buildings, how to make an existing home more energy efficient, because not all of us can just build a brand new house, and then small changes that add up. So, and then we had Chris Allen of Landform Architecture, who contributed this section, and how we should preserve native landscapes, use local materials, express our culture, naturally ventilate, orient the sun. Anyway, the one thing that is happening now, Chris Allen told us that he actually has had several people now that came with this our book into the office and said, I would like to build a house according to this book. So we are quite pleased with that.
So now we're going to ask for your input one last time. So if you could launch that poll, Jeff, that would be fabulous. Great.
Launched.
Okay.
What do
So
you
we're
think?
hoping to say that, what you would think the most effective ways to motivate property owners to purchase, build, or renovate more climate resilient homes. And do you think we're on the right track? I'm glad to see somebody saying a disaster, because from where I sit as an information officer in the EOC, sometimes it takes a disaster, sometimes it takes two, before people start thinking about really taking accountability and responsibility for their own property. So let's end that poll, because we're speed dating with the guidebook here so we can stay on track. So it looks like government legislation hits the top mark. And education and awareness down at 13%, and increased insurance premiums. Well, very interesting results. I hope we get to share this out with those that have been on the seminar today.
Okay.
So thank you.
So
We'll move on.
Yeah, even Zoe, I'm just conscious of time. So
Yep,
one
we're done.
more minute.
just wanted to mention one more thing, that we've at 16 minutes right now. We've actually, the book was we were awarded more funding to now have webinars unpacking the guide, and that are accredited for realtors, and we've done 7 already, or 8. One was about energy efficient homes. So these webinars are now being very popular, and we get experts to go dig deeper into the
Much
topic.
like
today. And then I guess we don't have time for this poll, or do we? If you would use this guidebook as presented here at your workplace, I guess you would have to see the book to actually, this is just our presentation.
But it would be interesting to know if something like this would help you move that bar for climate resiliency and built environment.
And we do have them at the regional district office here. The planners are using it. The mortgage brokers at the Royal Bank are using it. That's as far as
Great.
I know.
Well,
Okay,
thank you,
thank
because
you.
82% of you could use it. Super. Thank you very
Super.
much for your
So let's
attention.
just close this and
Thanks, Ava. Thanks, Zoe. That's great. I think I would encourage people to just put any questions they have in the chat box, and I'm hoping we have time to get to a few of those at the end. And great. I'm now going to turn it over to Scott Jeffrey, City of Nelson. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, it's all right.
Okay, do you have me there now, Jeff?
Yeah, I can see you. I can't see your screen yet, but I can see we got.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll just introduce myself first here. I'm Scott Jeffrey, a career firefighter with Nelson Fire Rescue, and I've been at this job for 17 years. Previous to this, I was a wildland firefighter for 10 years. So I had quite an experience both with wildland urban interface fires and also with, one sec here.
I'm going to look at some of the questions we had in here, going back to the start. Scrolling through, there's a question from, oh wow, there's been a few questions. I think some of these questions, there was a question from David about, are there any mandatory guidelines or standards in BC? I think Lisa answered that, and this is, I assume, David, your question was around sort of those climate resilience things around flood, fires, and droughts and storms, and I think Lisa answered that. I'm not really familiar with any. I'm not sure if Lisa or anyone else on the session here is with any sort of mandatory requirements around any of those things.
I spoke of the ones that I'm aware of, but if there are others who know more than me, then I would love to hear about it as well.
Meredith was asking about low carbon resilient sources of backup power and who pays for it. Yeah, is there a risk of downloading the cost of grid unreliability to individuals?
Yeah, I did answer that in the chat. It's a good point about downloading the cost, and I answered that, you know, sort of the PV and battery storage is a very good looking option, but is unfortunately still prohibitive in terms of its cost. So until those batteries come down, then that's not really that feasible for most projects yet.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through the chat. Yeah, Scott, in the meantime, if you want to email me your presentation, I can probably share it for you if it's not working out.
Sure, I could try that. It's asking me to restart my browser, and I fear that I'm going to be outside the meeting. And
yeah, can you?
I would be also happy right now to just spend 5 to 10 minutes talking about FireSmart right off the top, and
yeah,
one of the right resources.
Totally, that sounds great.
So yeah, to summarize my presentation there, I had a firsthand story of wildfire loss that was in my family, or a near loss in this case. There's so many examples that I could have chosen in BC and Canada. There's the Garnet Fire of '94 in Penticton, Kelowna in 2003 with 239 houses lost, Fort McMurray 2016 with 2,500 houses lost. So, but I kind of chose to focus on this one in California that happened in 2015. It was February, really a fire that happened outside of normal fire season in California. And what happened was an electrically started fire from a transmission line started outside of the area where my sister Carlene lived in Swall Meadows, right near Mammoth Ski Hill. And they had this fire that occurred at the worst possible time. It occurred in the afternoon with 50 to 70 mile an hour winds. So this fire blew up the mountainside and right through their community. And they ended up losing 40 of 170 structures in that community. And the photos, when you look at that and the photos of the destruction that specifically targeted some houses and not others, really helped me clue into the importance of the work that we've long been doing in BC with FireSmart. And just showing how the key vulnerabilities up close to the individual buildings are what can make for a fire loss in those conditions. So in the city of Nelson, we have been doing Fire Smart since 2004. In our early days, this included very passive meetings, trying to engage people by hosting public information sessions, and it was really difficult to connect with people in that manner. So we started doing a more active door-to-door campaign, and that's where the connections were really made with people. When you can get into their yard with them and make those connections, answer specific questions about their homes and properties, that's what really engages them. Another thing that really engages them, as Eva had said, is a disaster. So we saw really sharp upticks in interest after 2003, of course, in Kelowna. And then we had some behind me on my side here. You can see a fire from 2015 burning in the outskirts of Nelson, in the Sitcombe Creek fire. Again, an aggressive overnight downhill spread of a fire. Really keyed our community into the possibility of ember-driven wildfire. So we've been long in utilizing the Fire Smart program, which looks at ways to make a building withstand a fire on its own. So myself as a Fire Smart assessor, I will go around to people's houses on invite and look at those key vulnerabilities at their homes. And I really always like to start in close to their home first. I like to start in the first 1.5 meters of their home. It's called the home ignition zone, zone 1A. The classic Fire Smart for rural areas was broken up into the first 10 meters, then the 10 to 30 and 30 to 100 meters. But when we look at it from the urban perspective in Nelson, it's really that new zone that we're talking about now, the home ignition zone that came out, initiated about 4 or 5 years ago out of the US FireWise program, been widely adopted in BC now for looking at the building itself and how it relates to the environment around it. So as I do wildfire assessments, I'll often get a complaint from a neighbor about a large conifer tree that's in the neighbor's yard, and they want me to come and look at this to their house and look at this conifer. Well, when I get there, it's usually never the problem is the conifer. It's little things that are really close to their own home that are the problem. That might be how they restore their recycling, where they're storing their wood, little things like whether they're using bark mulch right up against the house. So it's ideal to have a non-combustible surface right up to the house is key. And another key is to maintain that space over the years and not let the storage habits of people compromise the ability of a building to withstand a wildfire. I could talk right now about some of the projects that we've done in Nelson. Of course, we're accessing grants to implement our Fire Smart programs. That includes fuel mitigation, and we've done over the years, large-scale mechanical harvesting on the outskirts of town, and more recently through the Community Resiliency Investment Program, we have been able to access grant money for fuel mitigation within town, so within the municipal boundary on Crown land. So that has allowed us this past year to do fuel mitigation on 18 different sites, approximately 15 hectares in town. And all these things, they all help, but when it comes to creating a truly fire resilient community where the homes can have a better chance of withstanding wildfire, it's the efforts of the individual homeowner that really make the difference. So it's where we try to have that education campaign, and the ways we try to reach homeowners nowadays. We do a Fire Smart booth with pop-up banners like this at farmers markets and really talk one-on-one with people. But the real education component comes when you can get their phone number and connect with them for a wildfire Fire Smart assessment on their own home, and then they take a real interest in that. Other ways that we're connecting this, most recently this year with COVID, it's been difficult to connect in that personal way. So we're turning more to online resources, doing Facebook Live connections, and Facebook Live's a very simple way to get your message out there and show off the projects that you're participating in and get your Fire Smart message across. One more thing I'd like to talk about too is a lot of you as planners and coming from a planning background, and I haven't actually even see that Natalie from the city of Nelson might be out there watching too. And it was really our fire chief, Len McCharles, and the planning department in Nelson, specifically Natalie, who spearheaded a revision of our wildfire development permit area bylaw. This permit area was developed in 2013 to first identify some building and design constraints in a defined area of the perimeter of town. But then when Chief McCharles looked at this this bylaw in 2019 for a revision, realized that there's really all of the community can be equally at risk in the worst case scenario because of this ember transport can be up to 2 kilometers. So in considering that, Chief McCharles and the planning department, they wrote into the new bylaws some very specific requirements for landscaping design that prevented the planting of coniferous shrubs in the 1.5 meters adjacent to new construction. So it's not retroactive to past plantings and past landscaping efforts, but that is where our education component comes in and tries to catch those existing or previously existing plantings. The thing I love about that 1.5 meter designation, it really focuses the homeowners' attention on the area that they can best take action on themselves. It's really manageable, that 1.5 meters, as opposed to a 10 meter or more. When we look at our lots in town, 10 meters puts them through their neighbor's living room and into another property. So by focusing on that 1.5 meters, it's a great thing for our fire safety message. So Jeff, I guess maybe turn it back over to you and questions. Not sure how I'm doing for time here, but yeah, I apologize for my slideshow, guys, and my tech compatibility here, but hopefully I've been able to wing it and bring across the importance of fire safety with you guys, and really point you towards FireSmart BC as an online resource to start. So there's some great online resources nowadays.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Way to be adaptable. This is all adaptation. So good work. Good work to you. There was a couple of questions for you. One of them is around, and I know this was in your presentation, but around community, like what fire smarting at the community scale. Can you talk a little bit about that and like sort of, I mean, there's obviously the property specific, the 1.5 meters, but the broader sort of community scale fire smarting principles and practices and what?
Yeah, broader community scale. So this is where we have the Nelson Wildfire Resiliency Working Group. That's a collaborative effort with the regional district locally and BC Parks. So when it comes to fire smartings, particularly fuel management, you're up against a patchwork of ownership and a patchwork of jurisdictions. The hardest one to get around is the private property issue, because a lot of these programs and provincial grants in the past have not been able to be spent onto private land. Now that is changing in the most modern implementation of the community investment grants. They are changing now to allow some work on private property, but on that broader landscape, trying to create a landscape level field break, it really takes that collaborative working with your local partners. So that's where us working with the regional district of the Kootenay, regional RDCK regional district, the Central Kootenay here, and BC Parks. We have a large provincial park immediately adjacent to our town, and so we've actually even had this year, we had prescribed burns within the park, highly visible from town, and that's all in partnership with the Wildfire Management Branch and with BC Parks. So those local cross-agency collaborations are essential.
Thanks, Scott. One more question for you about, could you talk a little bit about the FireSmart community designation?
Yeah, FireSmart community designation is a program within FireSmart Canada, and there's a step and process to go through that. It involves having a FireSmart committee established, establishing projects that you can work towards as a community, and also a minimum investment of $2 per person. So FireSmart recognition like this There's a lot of local communities around us that have gotten this, and it really allows them a way to come together and build a work in a common interest together for communities and smaller communities particularly. Really have come together and bonded as a neighbor even on a neighborhood level and gotten that designation from FireSmart Canada. More information can be found through FireSmart Canada and FireSmart BC.
Great, thanks, Scott. So we now have about 12 minutes or so left, and I'm kind of scrolling around through the chat box and some of the comments. There was a comment from Andre here about insurance and the Fort McMurray fire and people having to, when they got their insurance payout after their house burned down, they had to rebuild back the same house they had before. So if they had, vinyl siding, for example, then they had to build back to vinyl siding. And I think that, that's definitely an issue. I think that goes to, and I'm just going to see if can I reshare the results of this poll? Yeah, this is really, so we had this poll of what do you think the most effective ways are to motivate property owners to purchase, build, or renovate more climate resilient homes? So there's this idea is like, should you go through insurance premiums or government legislation or education and awareness, maybe funding programs? So I think this, I'd like to kind of maybe pick the brains of all of you, and Lisa and Ava and Zoe and Scott. What do you guys see as if you were to choose one of those things, the one most effective way to kind of motivate people to climate proof their home?
I could start it off there, Jeff. And in 2016 with the Fort McMurray fire, there's $3.6 billion worth of insurance claims on that. So far and away much larger than what had been experienced in the past. The Garnet fire in 1994, there were 18 structures lost. There was a fire, I believe, around mid 2000s in Barrier and McClure. There was some significant structure losses in the Kamloops fire zone, and then Kelowna 2003. So the insurance, as these losses added up over the years and it got more and more significant, the insurance started to pay more and more attention to it. And then Fort McMurray, far and away 10 times more. So really starting to become a major flag on the horizon of the insurance company. The FireSmart Home Partners program is a FireSmart Canada initiative that is attempting to work with homeowners and document their FireSmart improvements in hopes that one day that these steps that the individual homeowners are taking can have some credit against their insurance premiums. So there are efforts being underway within the FireSmart community to tie it into insurance, but often what it takes is an even worse disaster to get that action happening.
Well, thanks, Scott. Yeah, what about Zoe and Ava? Do you guys have comments on that? I mean, that was the polling question you asked in your session. I would actually be curious to know what your response is to that. So, you were presenting on an education and awareness tool, essentially, right? So, I guess I'm just wondering if you were to answer that question, what do you think the most effective way is to encourage property owners to make resilience improvements to their home? Is it through insurance or legislation or education or funding programs, or does there have to be some sort of disaster in their area to kind of motivate them to do that?
Well, Scott, look, Jeff, let's just pick F, all of the above, because that's basically what the guidebook was about, is that in any one single way, FireSmart is wonderful. We embrace it wholeheartedly as a local government. But flooding is also an extreme issue, and all of us need to work together. We need to put policies in place as local governments, but insurance companies and mortgage lenders have to come to the table as they start realizing that they're getting hit hard. We look at it from that public head perspective. What can we try to do and put into the heads of the public? Because they may not understand the complexities of what Lisa's talking about and what you're talking about, but for them to even just begin to look, as Ava said, at their own property as a watershed. Their own sphere of influence is what they own. The single most important investment a human's going to make is in their home. So we need that educational bridge to have them begin to look at that from that holistic perspective. and then reach out and utilize all of the materials and all of the advancements that are being made technologically towards building climate resiliency and climate literacy around all facets of preparation.
Education is a big part,
Mm-hmm.
because even if it comes policies and, you know, laws, if people understand it, then they are more willing to take it. Otherwise, they're objecting it, and they just think it's just another regulation we have to go by it. And when I tell people, Scott, about the triage, how firemen work, so if you don't have your house cleaned and organized on the outside, as the fire's moving in, they're gonna drive by your house. Oh, they just, it's like lightning.
Yeah.
People don't even think about it until they're actually explained and told. So
and you know, something that is new to me as I moved into emergency operations was, if there's a disaster, and I'm sure Scott will back me up on this, there's always cows involved. So we've even reached out to do on-site farm preparedness packages with the BC Climate Adaptation for Agriculture. So Scott, have you got any other suggestions for that?
Yeah, BC Wildfire has been involved in many evacuations. A big component of this is farm evacuations too. So it's something people don't immediately think about. They've actually done seminars over in Creston. It's a little higher agriculture area nearby us to the east, and so very much something at the forefront of certain rural residents' mind is a pre-plan of how they're going to evacuate those animals and farms. We had an evacuation in 2017 on the Harriet Proctor fire nearby Nelson, and a large component of that was in the early stages. Of course, people are quite highly mobile, yet much more difficult to move animals quickly. So they had to bring those emergency action plans into place sooner than they would for an evacuation order in place for the residents.
That 72-hour kit takes on a completely different complexity when you think about pot-bellied pigs and dogs and cats and having your medications ready for your elderly. So, you know, it's a whole gamut of stuff, but that opening the eyes to being prepared and looking around us as climate pushes us to do that.
Yeah, thanks. I want to throw that question out to Lisa as well. And I like your answer, Zoe, with the all of the above. I actually don't think that was an option, but that's okay. So Lisa, if you were, I mean, and again, it's sort of going back to like, if you were to make a recommendation of like, what's the one thing we can do to encourage homeowners to make their homes more resilient, or builders to make their property more resilient? Is it through more insurance premiums or funding programs or education or regulations, or does there have to be a disaster to kind of kickstart that process?
Well, I think the disaster, you know, it's a kind of a perverse terminology, but it's the window, it opens the window of opportunity, right? And we don't like to say disaster is an opportunity, but it is the event that garners interest, and then you leverage that interest into action. And so I think yes, but then all the rest I think are important as well. Like when we think about, like I work with a lot of local governments in setting policy, so I'm obviously very fond of regulation. But in order for regulation to work, I always kind of think of it as a pyramid. It's like at the bottom you have setting the groundwork, you provide education, you build industry capacity, you get the word out, you know, you put the structures in place so that people can actually do the things that they need to do. Then the second tier is kind of paving the way to the right choice. Do you put in financial incentives or disincentives? You know, do you put in actual like programmatic supports to like make the right choice the easy one? And then the final kind of tip of the pyramid is the regulation. So it's like, okay, now actually just you have to do it. So I think it's a combination of all those things at various stages in order to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess I'm definitely not the expert in the field, but I'm kind of going to throw it out to you guys, anyone else on the call. I'm working right now with the city of Edmonton, and I don't know if there's anybody on the call here that's from Alberta or Edmonton, but Edmonton just very recently put in place a requirement that all developers and new developments have to basically do they have to submit a climate resilience report, and they have to have to report on how they assessed climate risks and how they address those. And I know Andre made some comments earlier around the relay system and kind of not being a little cumbersome, and so Edmonton's gone down that path of like let's put in place some regulations and requirements for builders and developers, but they're at the point right now where they're saying, well, do we just require everyone to do the LEED resilience thing, or do we require everyone to do the relay system, or do we create our own standards and guidelines that are specific to Edmonton? And so, yeah, I don't know what the solution is for communities about whether do you require developers to do that, or do you focus more on education, or do you create your own? I'm not really sure. Meredith says it has to be simple. Brian Montgomery, I think it's Brian, like a sustainability checklist type thing. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that, but it's a question I'm tackling right now, so I'm looking for answers.
I mean, I'll just offer a quick thought. I know we're close to time. I think, even like the LEED requirement, the pilot credit 98 is just sort of, it's very broad and high level in terms of process, right? And so there are I think the process is quite similar. The methodology you choose, there are lots to choose from. So I think setting some kind of guideposts and standards for what you expect to see, but allowing some diversity in the methodology that people pursue right now is not a bad thing as we kind of move forward and try to figure out like, well, what is the best methodology here? Like, do you have to do like three full whole day workshops to figure this out? Or can we actually start to like, streamline this process a little bit? So I think we want to come to a place of some consistency in regulation, but right now I think it's really interesting to see how all the different methodologies coming out.
I think a few disasters have really sparked a lot of creativity. Because almost it's like COVID in a way. Almost everybody knows somebody that was affected by the fires, whether it be the Elephant Mountain fire or the Christie Mountain fire, and also with Grand Forks. But almost everybody has been affected by it. And I think when it gets down to that level and people are talking to people, then that is also going to support whatever happens in the policy angle.
Yeah,
And you like writing policy, Lisa.
Yeah, I remember I in my session I was talking about how I used those icons I used were from the city of Calgary. And Calgary, I'm working with them right now on creating a homeowner's guidebook similar to what you guys have, focused on climate resilience, and that was all driven by the big hailstorm that happened there in June. And I don't have the stats on me, but it was I believe it's the costliest hail event in Canadian history or something like that. But it was quite a devastating event, and so city council said, that's it. We need to do something about this, and that's one of the ways they're responding to that. 1.6 billion. Thanks, Andre. I think we're at time here, and I know Meredith and I had set up a little group chat focused on climate resilient homes and buildings, and so whenever there's a chance to do that, I would encourage you all to go there if you want to chat more about this. And thanks to everyone for participating, especially my fellow colleagues here, Lisa, Scott, Ava, Zoe. Thank you guys, and thanks to everyone for attending, and I'll see you back on the conference. I think I have to remind you to end this and go back to the session. Mark, is there any other tech things I need to know about, or are we good? I think everyone's figured this out by now.
No, I think we're good. Yeah, there's an open session starting in about 15 minutes. So
great.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope I got all the addresses here for our book.
I think, Ava, I think someone told me I can download this chat session.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
I don't know how to do it. Something.
But that doesn't matter.
Mark will help you with that.
Mark,
Right?
you can do that?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're smart.
Great.
Well, thank you, everyone. It was great. And man, Scott, great job.
Thank you. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
awesome.
my apologies for my misclick there, catastrophic misclick, but hopefully I passed on some great fire smart knowledge and inspiration.
You have such deep knowledge, it doesn't matter. I guess.
It was very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Well, thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thanks
Bye.
so much.